HiSec Buyback offers a 90% JITA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
This is Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online. I'm your host, Artemis Albosa. On my lonesome today, although kept in good company by all of the viewers on Twitch. Welcome. It is currently Tuesday, January 11th, and we did something a little bit different today. Before the show ran, before the start of this intro, I've actually been streaming for around an hour, sort of prepping the show, gathering some info, getting some great information from a friend of the show, Fonsui. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely make sure to tune in live next time. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. We've got some game news coming up. As I'm sure you're all aware, the Doctor Who event begins on the 13th. So that's this coming Thursday, January 13th. We've got some news coming up from that. Also some patch notes. Quick little discussion about player news and a preview of tomorrow's show, if you will. And then we'll wrap things up. Alright, so jumping right into things here, let's talk patch. It is Tuesday, which is patch day, and we got a patch notes today. There are a few key things that I do want to point out, though. First and foremost, we want to talk about a bug fix that occurred, which is innocuously described in the patch notes as adjusted mutated drones to better utilize orbit velocity. But as we learned from Fonsui, this is far more impactful than you may have imagined. In fact, mutated drones were in a state of complete unusability before. And the reason that is based on the mechanics of how drones fly. So you as a pilot, you have like micro warp drives on your ship and you activate those modules and stuff like that. NPCs and drones have similar mechanics to try and mimic this. So they will have a maximum velocity, a micro warp drive speed, and then they will have an orbit distance and an orbit speed, so that when they get close enough, they slow down, such that their guns, their turrets on the drone itself are able to track its target. And if I understand this bug correctly, the specific issue was with the mutated drones. The stats which got rolled over, carried over to the new mutated module, lost the orbit distance. So the drones didn't know when they were close enough to their target to stop zooming around really, really fast and go to that lower orbit velocity to enable them to track. And so with the turrets, basically your transversal velocity, how fast you're going relative to your target side to side, meant that they couldn't track fast enough and they couldn't do any damage. So this has been changed. They now have corrected orbit distances, which allows them to utilize their orbit velocity and basically makes them viable, makes them usable. So we'll have to keep an eye on what those look like in terms of the marketplace. It's going to be more difficult than normal to keep an eye on the mutated drones because there are so many of them. They're also not sold on the market directly. They're sold in contract. So it'll be worth keeping an eye on. But that's good news if you are a Concord Rogue Analysis farmer. Your loot just got more valuable, probably. And it's also good news if you're an Abyssal runner or anybody else who wanted to use these mutated drones, but you couldn't before. And just as a side note, it's worth keeping in mind this orbit velocity versus micro warp drive velocity, even if you're not using the mutated drones. Quite frequently, you'll see small gang pilots or pilots who are interested in PvP will choose acolytes over warriors. And there's an aspect to this where you'd want to use acolytes for the damage type. Acolytes are the Amar version, so they do EM damage, versus warriors, which do explosive. So if you're fighting an armor tank ship versus a shield tank ship, that's a consideration. The other consideration is the speed of the warriors themselves. So one thing which can happen, especially if you're flying a ship with a speed bonus to the drones already, is the warriors will be going so quickly as they're chasing the target that they will slingshot it. And so if it were going a little bit slower, it'd catch up, go to that orbit velocity, and be able to track. but because the warrior is going so freaking fast, it will catch up and then slingshot past and never slow down enough. So then it realizes, oh, I'm too far away again on the other side, better kick my micro warp drive back on and come back, and it will just slingshot back and forth. Eventually it will settle in, but it takes a little bit too long. And so you lose a lot of damage. So if you're a small gang pilot, if you're a PvP pilot, and you're using these light drones to try and shake tackles, you can leave grid or avoid getting tackled to begin with so you can continue kiting. It might be worth swapping to a slower drone, counterintuitively, to kill the stuff faster. Interestingly enough, all mutated drones of a given size have the same name and type, meaning you can no longer know what damage type you're being shot with from the drone name. That's an interesting one as well. The whole "we cannot read our code" thing is a lie. They've been using it for years. I'm not going to speculate on coding and spaghetti code and pause code and whatever. It's beyond my knowledge, let alone my expertise. Alright, another interesting one right below this. Blue ice belts have begun to be distributed once again. This is great news if you're a Galente pilot in Galente space, if you're a miner. Apparently the blue ice belts have been missing for a few days, and they're back now, which is cool. One thing I didn't look up, let's look at fuel blocks. It would take a long time, I think, for the fuel block prices to be impacted, but let's verify. Oxygen fuel blocks are the ones which use Galente ice, blue ice, and it was very recent. Maybe there's a little bit of a spike here, but I don't think so. I think it wouldn't have gotten this far down the chain. What about taupe? And I probably spelled taupes wrong. Taupes take less to manufacture. Yeah, so we did see the taupes price rise, and it looks like starting to correct a little bit. So if we look back for a while, it's been dropping, then it started rising, and now there's a slight bit of a correction since the patch hit today. We'll see if that continues. This could just be market pressure from various ships, we're not sure, but something to keep an eye on. Alright, what else in the patches are worth noting? Lots of bug fixes, lots of graphical updates, basically getting the fit and finish prepped for the new players that are hopefully coming with the Doctor Who event. Worth noting here, we had on the Zephyr, there's an interesting story behind this one. If you haven't seen it already, the Katya Say's new video series, New Eden Travelers, has launched. Highly recommend you check it out. And in getting that footage, they had to fly the Zephyr around, and were unfortunately plagued by this bug, where the Zephyr's ship model would go crazy when you were warping. It ruined some footage as I understand it. And so fortunately that has been fixed, so hopefully it'll be easier to gather footage for future episodes of that series, which I am definitely looking forward to. It is phenomenal. Other changes, a little bit further down, looking at the user interface specifically. Let's see if I can find it here. There was a change to session change timers. Here we go. So you might be asking yourself, hang on, what is a session change? I've never heard of this before. Session changes happen in a few different scenarios. The most common one would be like changing your ship, or docking or undocking. That sort of thing will cause a session change to occur. And when a session change happens, it severely limits what you're able to do in game. Basically, like, things are processing for 6 seconds or so, can't do anything else. And for the longest time, this was just invisible. You had to know it existed, and otherwise you'd be like, is my game lagging? What's going on? I can't do anything. CCP has since added a session change timer up in the top left with all of like your drug timers and stuff like that. And fortunately, or unfortunately for a while, it was missing the jumping to a jump clone in the same structure. So if you're in a Citadel, you could jump clone to a jump clone in your same Citadel to swap. that would generate a session change. The timer didn't generate. Now it's there, which is phenomenal. I use this quite often, and it is always frustrating to me. So I'm glad that I'll be able to see that. And instead of sitting there just spam clicking my ship, I can watch the timer tick down and then spam click my ship. This is a cool thing. All right, there are other just general info and changes. Let me look at you. Oh, tweeting at a certain dev won't get cat ears in the game anytime sooner. I mean, this basically is guaranteeing that people are going to tweet at certain devs to get cat ears in the game sooner, or just to annoy the dev. So I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish here, but that's a thing in case you were curious. Moving on, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we have the Doctor Who event beginning on the 13th, and in preparation for it, CCP released a dev blog called Get Ready for Doctor Who, Ships, Fits, and Skill Plan. I am really glad that they did this. There's some discussion to be had about the way in which they did it, the fits which were included, but just as a general theme, for us experienced EVE players, the events are nice because it's new content, they're new problems to solve, new optimization formulas or new situations to optimize for, so to speak. It's what we enjoy, many of us. For newer players coming into EVE, the events are interesting gameplay, but they aren't necessarily equipped with the tools they need to solve these optimization problems. So I think it's really great in this case, and I hope they do this for future events as well, but specifically in this one, where we're partnering with an external what's the word I'm looking for here? IP, there we go, an external intellectual property. They aren't necessarily already EVE players, so they might have zero resources in terms of how to fit a ship. What does it mean to be exploring? What does it mean to be mining? What does it mean to do combat sites? So I think it's great that they're lowering the bar there for these newer players, and they're doing it in a way without compromising the sites. So in the past, if CCP wanted to run a new player-friendly event, it would sort of be dumbed down for everybody, which meant it was less valuable for us as veteran players. It's nice to see here they're creating resources for new players and targeting the event specifically, while also maintaining that higher level end sites to be good gameplay for us. Alright, but what specifically is in this dev blog? They talk a bit about getting prepped, they talk a lot about skill plans, using the community fittings in the Neocom, and the EVE Academy, which is a great thing to introduce players to. We've got videos for fitting your ship, and they talk about the different types of sites. So we've got exploration, which is something you can do during this, and they give us some scanning and some hacking tips. Then they talk about industry as well. I'm glad that they included in here trading for profit. This is a call out we've received from players, or from new players, and also new player trainers. So people like EVE University, other new player-friendly organizations would be like, when somebody joins, the market is such an integral part of a player's gameplay, even if they're not a marketeer. So even if you're not buying low, selling high, trading on the margins, speculating, investing, what have you, you still have to be able to interface with it to do literally anything. Like, as an example, the most common one back in the day was that you would run out of ammo during your starter missions and have no idea how to get more, because you were never introduced to the concept of the market and that you could go and buy more ammo. So I think it's fantastic that they are taking this opportunity to introduce players to the market. I wish it was a separate thing as opposed to lumped in with industry, because a player might think, oh, I'm only interested in combat or exploration, and totally miss this. But it's good that it's in there nonetheless. Hey, Dominarch, welcome. I appreciate the sub, man. How you doing? Training, manufacturing skill. They talk about manufacturing as well, which is interesting. Normally in event sites, I would expect them to be mining related, not necessarily manufacturing related. We'll have to see how that plays out in game once everything hits TQ. I know there's stuff on Hobo Leaks. I know that there was a fantastic interview between Ashtarothi and CCP Fozzie and CCP Swift with some other spoilers and things. I'm personally of the opinion of let's wait until it hits TQ to see what actually lands before discussing the details. So we'll leave that as it is, but I'm glad to see they're including some tutorials here. And I've never actually seen this guide. I'm completely unfamiliar with this user, StrangeNet. So I'm, after the show, going to go watch this and see if this guy has other interesting tutorials. It's always great to find new EVE creators doing things, and it's especially great to see CCP highlighting them. Like, they could have very easily slapped in an EVE Academy video or an EVE University thing, something from a more established creator. It's great to see them putting in something from somebody I've never heard of. Maybe they are really popular and I'm just out of the loop, I don't know. But I love that they're already introducing players to the fact that EVE has a thriving community. Outside of Reddit, that is. Alright, don't expect to overcome the Daleks without a fight. They talk a little bit about the skill plans for combat sites. I will mention here, these fittings. They're part of the community fittings or part of the EVE Academy fittings. I don't recall which. But as we understand it, these aren't the best. There's a bit of a discussion to be had about min-maxing and where you should and shouldn't and can and can't do that for new players. But you can be sure that we are working with Fonsui, and he's got some friends who are looking at improving these fittings for any newer players trying to run these sites. So when we do our coverage probably this Sunday, hopefully we'll have some updating fittings for you. If you're a newer, lower skill point pilot who wants to get in onto these sites, knowing CCP, or fingers crossed, CCP would have checked these fittings actually work with the sites, but we'll have to find out. They have said that higher level combat sites for Doctor Who event will be challenging for the most accomplished of players. Well, I tell you what, the last time they said they had challenging sites were the capital sites, or not the capital sites, the sites which drop capital components in lowsec and nullsec. And there was a lot of gnashing of teeth over just how difficult those were relative to the rewards. So CCP says something is going to be challenging. I'm willing to believe them now, and I just hope it's going to be worth it. That's all I can say. And then they introduce people to PvP. Awesome. I really love this devlog. It might not be the most informative or insightful thing for you as an experienced player, but in terms of its value that it adds to newer players, the timing with the new event, that it's targeted specifically for, hey, you want to interact with this event, here's how you get started, that is fantastic. It still leaves room for community creators like Ashtarothi, who else comes to mind, Hateless Gaming, Nth Dimensional, like all of these community creators will still have lots of opportunity to do their tutorials, to min-max, to really get the most out of the experience. And they even go and introduce you to some of them by introducing you to the community through this manufacturing guide. So I'm really happy with this. Great to see that it's coming out. I'm really glad that they're getting more use out of the EVE Academy videos because they're also fantastic. Just overall, I love this thing. Thank you, CCP. Putting together a stabber, omen, thorax, and caracal. Right on, right on. Alright, good stuff. Looks like that's all of the the game news I had for you today. Let's shift focus a little bit over to player news. And of course, the big player news as of late, we talked a lot about it on Sunday. And it'll continue to be news as we see what the fallout is going to be. But Ranger Regiment is disbanding. AOM has disbanded, but is actually reforming a little bit. I'm not going to go into too much detail because Shen is going to talk about it quite a bit tomorrow. Shen is a member of, or was a member of AOM. I'm not sure where he's landed now. But for those unfamiliar with the situation, AOM, Army of Mangoes, was an alliance who lived down in Esoteria. They had been at war for months with Fire Coalition. Very recently, Fraternity deployed down and sort of declared war. There had been ongoing hostilities for a while. They just made it an official deployment very recently. Not in response to, but sort of coinciding with that, AOM announced that they were going to be disbanding and joining Ranger Regiment. and Ranger Regiment were members of the Imperium. They were an Imperium alliance. The specific details of that merger were that AOM would be coming in intact. So even though they'd be joining as individual corporations, their entire leadership structure and chain of command would remain intact. And this was something which the Mittani, the leader of the Imperium, was not happy with. So they kicked the entirety of Ranger Regiment out of the Imperium. Ranger Regiment previously was involved in the conflict going on up here in Cloud Ring, in addition to living down in Period Basis or Paragon Sol. I want to say it was Period Basis. It was. They were living in Period Basis. So the fallout from that is still ongoing. We're still waiting to see where all of the corporations are going to land. And so far we're seeing a little bit of a split. So it's important to make a distinction between the different players who would have been members of Ranger Regiment prior to this disbandment. There are going to be original Ranger Regiment members who were never part of Artium Mangos, who were already members of the Imperium. And it seems like the majority of them are going to the Bastion. CEO is Carneros. He's doing a show live literally right now, Carneros and Chill, over on the CCP channel, which is pretty cool. But they are gaining quite a few corporations formerly from Ranger Regiment. All of these ones right here. And so these were already members of the Imperium who were kicked from the Imperium as a result of Ranger Regiment being kicked, but are then being brought back in, which is part of the plan. They aren't sneaking around anything. This is, you could think of it like a forced whiteout sort of thing, where the Ranger Regiment was kicked out. They didn't want their leadership structure anymore, but they wanted the members. They want the people to stay in the Imperium. So that's what they're getting. Then we have another cohort of groups to look at, which is the Army of Mangos. And theirs is a bit more interesting and complex. So the Army of Mangos, you'll see on the graph here, they had their members, they had their corps. They dipped really quick on the disbandment, and now they've rebounded a bit. So there are a few corporations who are coming back to Army of Mangos and sort of reforming after they decided to disband and join the Imperium. Not sure what's going to happen with that. Maybe Shen will have some more info for us in the future. But that's something to keep an eye on. They're going to be a whole lot less powerful than they initially were. Just looking at the member count, like going from 6k down to 2 and a bit, it's going to be a different style of gameplay. It's going to be a different world. But it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do. Other members of AOM have been going and joining Dracarys. Dracarys is an Imperium alliance. They live in Catch and Quirius. I'm not sure, like, Imperium politics I'm just not too familiar with. There are some groups which are official members of the Imperium. There are some groups which are just affiliated with them. Typically those groups live in Quirius. So I think Dracarys is officially Imperium. Hopefully somebody in the chat can correct me if I am incorrect. But they are gaining lots of corporations and members from AOM. So the AOM groups who are going to be joining Ranger Regiment, Ranger Regiment's gone now. They still want to join the Imperium, so they're joining Dracarys instead, which is cool to see. So that's just a quick update on where we are now. Like I said, there's going to be a lot more of a deep dive into it on tomorrow's show from the combat perspective, and with a bit more detailed information that Shen has just being involved and going through it himself, which will be cool to see. Also, just as a note, last Tuesday, when the fraternity deployment was announced, I said, get your way down to Esoteria if you want to get in on some structure kill mills, if you want to steal some cores, perhaps, because structures are going to be dying. I was right, but for the wrong reason. The structures are, in fact, dying. We have Sotios, Fortizars, everything in between dying over in Esoteria. Some of them to fraternity, like I expected. But then also, some of them are just dying to the Imperium itself, which is pretty interesting to see. So if we look at Citadel losses, you'll see the Sotio, which died, but then you'll also are going to see Athenor is dying to the Bastion, etc., etc. More Athenor is dying to Goonswarm. So structures are dying at a faster clip than even I expected, but that's due to not just the fraternity bashing on them, also the Imperium is bashing on them. Alrighty. Other in-game news, just looking at the wars we've been tracking as of late, the Fire Coalition war is in a bit of a weird spot. It's pretty much died down as I understand it. So Wrecking Crew aren't, and Dreadbomb in particular, there isn't much of a hot conflict going on. They aren't trying to install, or they don't have interest in pushing further out from Providence and Ketch. Fire Coalition doesn't seem to have much of an interest in pushing into Ketch and Providence. So that's pretty well cooled down, especially with the complexity of Stain and Esoteria politics right now. But we are still seeing a little bit of activity over in Scalding Pass. I'm not sure if it's just a singular Imperium SIG, which is deployed over here and doing some damage, but this is sort of the heartland of Fire Coalition territory. We're seeing a few time respawn, a few structures being destroyed, and a little bit of fighting happening. It'll be interesting to see if this develops any further, given that PanFam, living just up here, seem to be siding with Fire Coalition in more recent conflicts. I don't think there's much of an opportunity for them to sort of smell blood in the water and jump in on the bandwagon against Fireco. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a little bit of a flash in the pan, some FCs thinking they have good access to content here, taking advantage of it while it's there, and then moving on when there's greener pastures down the road. But we'll definitely keep an eye on it and keep you updated if things do escalate. Alright, well that's a quick look around the map about the in-game events, about the upcoming patch, or sorry, the patch that just happened, and the upcoming event starting on January 13th. As a reminder, tomorrow, January 12th, we're going to have Shen on. He's going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the combat and the politics happening with the end of Ranger Regiment and the maybe reformation of AOM. So it's definitely stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you were here for the pre-show, I hope you enjoyed that as well. I definitely appreciate any feedback you have on how that went. Just send it over to me, and also, of course, the show in general. Feel free to shoot me a message on Discord if you'd like to. Thank you very much. See you next time.